Right. Well, welcome to our third Learning Over Lunch series. We know this is a really busy time of year and we have a really small group today, but we're going to go ahead and record this event and share what Nancy Taquino and I learned at the Transform AACN Essentials meeting this past week. And then we can also provide a brief summary at the retreat on January 17th on campus when we're all together. So Nancy, welcome. It's a whirlwind.
It was very busy. Yeah,
Really.
it was a great meeting. So
Yeah. So do you want to get started and just start with like your insights and takeaways and I can
yeah, we're just going to be very casual about this. And um, so I think the biggest takeaway for me was, first of all, that it was such a large group. It was we went to the pre-conference, and that was all focused on the sub competencies, and I mean actually um on the essentials and how to actualize them into practice. It was an entire 8 to 5:30 period. And there were about 350 people at that meeting from all the way across the country. And then when we started the full conference the next day, there were 700 people from across the country. So clearly this is, and I know Sara had mentioned that she was at the conference last year, and at least at the pre-conference around the essentials, and that it was a much smaller group. So it's very clear that the momentum has captured most universities across the country. I think for me, that felt very reassuring that we're all working in concert together. It took away any maybe slight illusions that I might have had that this was maybe a nice to do rather than it's an essential quote, no pun intended, activity to do. And I found it also really interesting that it's changing very rapidly because there's just so much that's being evolved as people are attempting to do this across the country. So the first session that we attended, which was this all-day focus on the essentials, what did strike me there also was that the approaches that we've been taking thus far are in alignment with most of what other institutions are doing. Everyone is kind of approaching it slightly differently, but our approach to mapping first, finding the gaps, and now looking at, I know the BSN, each of our programs is approaching it slightly differently, as we've talked about. The BSN is looking at spheres of care and potentially some adaptations of their course alignment. The MSN folks have been looking at something a little bit similar. Both groups are talking about high stakes testing and alternative ways to educate, because that was the second big aha moment for me. Was there was a very large emphasis on CBE, the approaches in contrast to our traditional ways of educating, and how critically important that is to getting students practice ready, because that's really the goal. So I think one of the things that Sara and I will do after this, and we have a little bit more time, we just got home day before yesterday, and you know how your brain is just so full with all this great information, is put together like some talking points about the why, because we had a really great presentation by Dr. Jacqueline McMillan Bower, who is from Duke, and she did an opening that talked about why do competency-based education, and she had some great examples of which is sort of what we all know, but it was changes in healthcare, the healthcare system. It was the fact that unfortunately a lot of research has come out talking about the fact that students, it's terrible statistics, like 28% of the new graduates are not considered practice ready by their practice sites. So the impetus for change, for us to really change how we teach and how we organize our coursework, really resonated with me after I heard that presentation. So we'll get you some more of those statistics as we have a little bit more time and a talking points kind of a thing. And then the next really interesting insight that I had was in this competency-based education session that we spent the whole day doing. They started with the whole concept of backward design, which is what we have used. And it reinforced, I guess, at least for me, the value of the approach that we're taking, that it's consistent with the experts across the country. This is what they're really recommending. And AACN is in the process of putting together some more definitive explanations or a toolkit about how to do the revision of a curriculum, but it includes for sure using backward design. And they suggested that we look first programmatically at what the 3 steps of backward design. First, you look at what the outcomes of your students, what you want them to look like when they graduate, and you look at that from a programmatic rather than a specific course level basis to begin with. And then you say, okay, well, once we know what that is, then how will what's the evidence that the students have actually mastered these competencies or proficiencies? And then you finally go to how you're going to set up your courses to accomplish those goals. And one of the things that they asked us to start to do, because I think all of us, when we've looked at the sub-competencies, sometimes say, well, how would for instance, one says the student demonstrates that they have a spirit of inquiry. Well, what does that mean? And what does that actually mean in practice? How would we know that the student is actually demonstrating that? And so they are asking us to start to look at specific behavioral indicators, they're called, for each competency, so that we will be able to really definitively know ourselves what we're expecting to see when our students are competent, and also that the student will have a good understanding, and our practice partners will know that as well. Now, that's very evolutionary, and there is going to be a national group of AACN folks that are going to be putting those behavioral indicators together. But Sara and I, and we were talking to Susan Colbridge, who is one of the AACN leaders afterwards, and kind of talking about what our approach has been. And I was really, because I thought that maybe we would have to come back and start there, developing indicators for each of the sub-competencies, which would have been a bit overwhelming. But she said that this national group is going to be working on it, but they really want input from us. So I think we have an opportunity as a university, because we have unique characteristics that we can bring forward in terms of our approach with using Jesuit values, Ignatian pedagogy, perhaps a theory, to help inform the national picture in terms of what what the sub-competency performance indicators might be. So more to follow with that. So if that particular conversation kind of spiked anyone's interest, if you're interested in working on something like that, then let Sara and I know. We're not going to probably tackle that with the faculty in January. We're going to start with the approach that we had talked about before, which was to look again at our courses, our existing courses, and et cetera. But I think that's a major takeaway for me, is that there's so much more work that's happening, and we have an opportunity to participate in that. It's not a closed system, if you will. So I found that very encouraging, because sometimes you feel a little bit like it's been a bit prescriptive. And I think then the last major insight I had was the ongoing emphasis on, if we're going to transform education, it has to start with us as teachers. We have to look very differently at how perhaps we traditionally have taught in order to be able to deliver competency-based education. So what that says to me is, again, I think we have been on the right path with this, with the work that we've done in the 2 retreats that we've had. We've been very intentional about saying, as a faculty team, who are we and what do we want our students to look like? We're going to continue some of that work in January. And I think having all of us aligned more it just because we're all different. There's 3 programs, there's lots of different content that we all cover, et cetera. But if we're more aligned as a team and have this opportunity to really to look at using backward design, this approach, I think we're going to accelerate the work a lot faster. And I was also encouraged because it seemed like some of the presentations that we heard where people were kind of farther along had kind of done used the same approach of having faculty come together in the retreats, having a structured process, having a steering group like we have, and then engaging, all the faculty in an ongoing way as a team, rather than having just a select group of people working on this, off in a corner. So I guess I would, summarize to say that I think it was a phenomenal conference. Next year, it will be on December 5th in New Orleans. I think Sarah and I kept thinking, I wish more of all of you were there with us, because there's so much to learn, and all of us pick up something slightly different. But in general, I would say it was extremely valuable, and I felt actually really proud of our university, and I felt proud to be a nurse, and I felt proud that we are embracing this opportunity to really change the way that we educate to get our students more practice ready. So
Great summary, Nancy. I can add just a few additional insights, and Nancy certainly covered things I had forgotten, so this is perfect. We should never go to these conferences alone, that's for sure. There's so much. I would just reinforce it was so good to be hearing the words backward design over and over again, and it was so reassuring to know that that's what we had been doing, and that's the approach we had been taking. It was incredibly affirming. Also, the idea of, I've been really frustrated with those little sub-competencies, because I look at those and I'm like, so how do we know if a student does that? Because most of them are not measurable. And so it was so affirming to hear them say, you're right, these aren't measurable, and there needs to be behavioral indicators underneath each of those sub-competencies, which is a whole nother layer of work to do, which was then frustrating. But then we also heard that they were going to be putting task force together to begin to compile some of that, but they were also going to be asking us for input. So if there's a particular, like, Kim comes to mind as someone who teaches psych and community health, she may want to look at competency number 2 in relationship to person-centered care, and begin to fill in some of those blanks. And the way they want us to do that is to think of 3 levels. I think in our earlier conversations, we've talked about introducing concepts, threading concepts, and then demonstrating them, like the 3, like we should have everything 3 times. And they came up with the same 3 levels, but they have a name for them. They're calling them developing, developed, and then highly developed. But what they expect is that we are able, and the highly developed is where they're consistently demonstrating something. And what's really our goal is that the students are demonstrating, developing, and developed for us. And then highly developed is something that might actually occur in practice later on. But for example, Nancy and I got to play with one. We were to work on one in small groups. So we looked at under domain 2, person-centered care, we looked at 1.2 I think one of them, one about fostering caring relationship. Well, how would you know, for example,
2.1E, yeah,
a
2.1E.
student were fostering a caring relationship? Well, I just put the question in ChatGPT and see what they had to say, because I thought, let's ask them. And what they said was that you would see active listening, empathy, effective communication, respect for privacy, cultural sensitivity, emotional support, professionalism, attend to the individual's needs, patience, and and care and compassion. So then I'm thinking, well, how do you know they're doing that? All of these could be. So then Nancy and I talked about, okay, active listening. That's the first one. How would we know if a student were active listening? So we thought, well, eye contact, open body language, using clarifying statements to make sure you understood what the patient was saying. Those are sort of examples. And so under developing, we might put developing a patient-centered relationship. Under developing, it might be those things about eye contact, open body language, clarifying statements. Those are just one example. Now, they're not saying we have to go in and do all this. They're going to try to put focus groups and groups of folks together to develop some of these behavioral pieces. But if there's an area or a specialty that you want to work on and you want to begin to fill in some of these blanks, because we know that these aren't measurable the way they're presented to us, then that's something that we can work on. And so the other big thing I took away is when we're looking at our Bloom's taxonomy and the verbiage that we use in writing our learning outcomes for our particular objectives and learning outcomes, and I can't believe I hadn't really thought about it this way, but really the language we use in our learning outcomes should match the learning assessments that our students do. So under the cognitive domain, if we're doing something about remembering, which is also like recall, identify, those things, then that's a good place for like a multiple choice test. So if we use a learning outcome around remembering, then that might be a good place where we're testing. If it's about understanding, then we might be doing a paper or a case study or concept maps. If we're asking students to do apply, if they were asking them to apply, again, that might be something around a case study or a simulation or narrative pedagogy. If we're asking them to analyze, that might be like a debate or some project. Again, case studies fill in a lot of these blanks. Creating might be a research project, an essay, developing teaching materials for patients that might be creating, and so forth. So it made me realize that we're going to have to spend a lot more time thinking about Bloom's taxonomy and the verbs that we use for our learning outcomes. And it's not really rocket science once you start thinking about it, but I think we're all going to be much more intentional about our teaching, and that's exciting to me. Not just exciting for two reasons. One is it gives us an opportunity to really highlight what's unique about USF, that we are an Ignatian, a Jesuit institution that uses an Ignatian pedagogy approach. And so we will be doing a lot more, probably maybe evaluating, where we'll be having students engage in reflective practice activities. But at the same time, we're going to have a language across nursing schools across the country, which is really nice. I think we're going to be able to communicate with other nursing schools, and nursing graduates and nursing students are going to be able to be more in alignment with one another when they leave our programs. Or if our students need to transfer from one nursing school to another, it's going to make so much more sense now, because we're all going to be working more consistently in unison together. So I think the last thing I would say, and we can just dialogue after that, is another great presentation, Jacqueline. This Jacqueline from is really phenomenal. Nancy and I were both really attracted to her, of all the people that spoke, and maybe we're hoping sometime we can have her out to USF to meet with us. But she did a great presentation on the idea of coaching our students. And if you recall, when we had our first retreat last year, Eileen brought in the USF coach to talk to us about coaching. And Jacqueline really highlighted the same things, that this new approach to teaching is going to be much more relational. We need to be more targeted in the feedback we give. We need to be more receptive, giving and receiving feedback. We need to be sensitive to culture. We really need to establish trusting relationships with our students, and that means us being really reliable and showing a genuine interest in our students, delivering consistent communication, asking them questions, being really curious and listening to them, and for us displaying empathy with them. I noticed this last year or so, I've started, if a student doesn't attend class, I send a little email checking in saying, I'm really concerned about you. You were really missed in class today. Is everything okay? Please check in with me. And just by, instead of saying you weren't in class today, what happened? But I send a message of concern, and it makes such a difference. And when I say we really missed you and your presence is really important to our learning community, it holds the students to a higher level of, I think, accountability and professionalism, and sends a different message. So those are things I've been practicing. So I think those are some of the major highlights. I think she really concluded with saying this way of, like she talked about encouraging a growth mindset, like to normalize the struggle. This is hard work. We're all in this together. Embrace the word yet. You haven't yet mastered this, but that's why you're here. We're all here to support you in learning together. And people learn at different rates and different paces, and that's okay. And we need to, acknowledge mistakes, but then celebrate corrections, giving students a chance to go back and make corrections in their work. And it's not about oversimplifying. It's about breaking it down into meaningful, measurable units that are meaningful for our students. Coaching approaches are very individualized. We're supposed to ask more open-ended questions. And I mean, these are the same things we want our students to do when they graduate. So we're being asked to practice those things with our students. So I'm going to pause and quit talking and see if you have questions. And then also, Nancy, if I sparked further thought in you, please let me know.
Well, one thing that that there was continual emphasis about was using the clinical judgment model in a purposeful way throughout all of our course, especially especially in the BSN and the ME programs and in the DNP, not quite so much in the nursing. RN to MSN program wasn't quite as prominent. But along with that thinking, there was also a lot of dialogue, and I went to a couple of presentations where faculty are really working on, because everyone has the same, sounds like some of the same problems that we have in terms of having kind of a disconnect sometimes between what's taught in the didactic setting versus what's taught in the clinical setting. Lots of us, it was pretty across the board that people had concerns about the clinical faculty being adjunct and not necessarily being as familiar with what we are doing in the classroom. And Jackie is, as Sarah was just saying, what really emphasized the use of the clinical judgment model and the need for alignment. She kept using the word alignment across your didactic, your SIM, and your clinical experiences, so that the student, again, is getting a very intentional, purposeful, coherent kind of integration of these developing competencies like Sarah was just talking about. So perhaps, you start a concept in a didactic course, if it's a clinical course, and then it's reinforced, in a simulation setting. And then when the patient goes back into the clinical area, another opportunity may or may not present itself. So that takes a lot of, coordination and collaboration between all of the faculty. So that will be, it's not a unique problem to us, but it is something that everyone seems to be talking about. And so we'll be keeping our eyes and ears open for some, innovative approaches that people start to talk about. But the whole concept of alignment really made a lot of sense to me. And she also talked a lot as well when she was discussing this coaching concept. Sometimes, rubrics seem a little bit prescriptive, and I think there's differences of opinion about how prescriptive or how useful rubrics could be. But in a CBE approach, when we're thinking about having transparency so that the student really is extremely clear about what the expectations are, it became obvious that rubrics are and very detailed rubrics are really important to the student learning experience. So that was another takeaway I had from a lot of what she talked about in terms of CBE, the importance of alignment and the importance of using the clinical judgment model across courses, and then the importance of clear, transparent communication as a coach, between the faculty and the students, and rubrics being one of the ways that you can do that.
Yeah, nice. All right. So what questions and comments and insights do any of you have? We're eager to dialogue.
Kind of like in the classroom, how long do we wait before anybody says anything?
I think it's reflected here that most of the schools of nursing, they have similar issues, and the vast majority of the schools are working on revising their curricula and moving towards competency-based education using similar designs like the backward design that we have started like long time ago. I remember like 4 to 5 years ago when we first started revising the master's curriculum, we used the backward design, and we brought experts from the school to coach us on that. I think that motivates us to keep doing what we have started. So it just reassures us and motivates us that we are on the right path in order to improve our curriculum and improve our learning outcomes.
You're absolutely right. And actually, when we went up to Susan Colbridge, who's the AACN director, like I said, and because when we had the work day and they started talking about the performance indicators, we both thought, oh my goodness, should we do this differently? And so we explained what we've been doing thus far and the approaches that we've been taking. And she was like, oh my gosh, that sounds great. Just keep going. And so I came away, and that's the beauty of going to a conference like that, where you can have some FaceTime with the key leaders, and you get some, background, because it's hard to navigate when you're doing everything, via these, communications that we have once a month or whatever, to know that you're on target. So I think that we had a renewed sense of that we're on the right path, and that it's also very clear that it's a very iterative process. There's not an A to B to C approach, and we may deviate, from a plan, and that's kind of what everyone is experiencing. So I think it cultivates within all of us some degree, kind of a commitment to being flexible and open and adaptable, and at the same time, we're not going to shift with the wind either, because we do know that it's very stressful for all of us to change directions constantly. So we're seeking to find that balance between flexibility and stability. But I think we're on pretty solid ground. So that was very reassuring. So thank you for your feedback.
Yeah. The other thing that came out the final day that I hope this will provide some solace to all of you is there was a presentation on the CCNE forum on revisions for the accreditation standards. So when they come to look, do our accreditation, and one of the things that came out of that committee is that they are not going to be evaluating us at the time for the foreseeable future at the level of subcompetency. They're really going to be looking at us at the level of competency. So we don't need to nitpick down into every single subcompetency. And their concern with that is if they do that, then we end up being sort of a checklist mentality, which is going to take away that openness and that creativity that Nancy just talked about. And in January, after the retreat, we're going to be sharing with you like the mapping tool and how to begin mapping. And I did my mapping at the airport on Saturday. And what I realized is the assignments I could come up with, like a lot of them met multiple subcompetencies all at once. Like if I have students write a paper, I can have them write a paper that comes at 2 or 3 of those subcompetencies all at once. And so that was refreshing to me that I was already doing some of this. And so I'd encourage you not to get bogged down as you start mapping your courses in every single little subcompetency, that really to think at the level of competency with some, and then use the subcompetencies as a way to create meaningful learning activities to help you, give you ideas for how to do that. And then there was a closing keynote on flourishing in healthcare, building individual, team, and system resilience. And I sat next to a colleague from Nevada State for that, and they have a caring science curriculum at Nevada State. And the presenters for that closing keynote were Terry Pipe, who used to be the dean at Arizona State University. She's now the chief wellness officer for the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and her colleague, another colleague, Sherry, I can't remember Sherry's last name, but Sherry is a really renowned researcher in the area of resilience, and she's at the University of Minnesota's Center for Spirituality. And they both commented on the need to not get too prescriptive, and that they really encourage schools to create an integrally based holistic curriculum. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's where we as USF can shine. And so afterwards, I went up and talked to them, and they both said that they were really troubled by the word competency being used. So that competency is, that this is a lifelong professional development. This is more of a literacy. It's something that's ever evolving and changing. And so that they weren't huge fans of the, limiting our thinking to the word competency. Competency can be a B- or a C- depending on the course you're taking. So it's not something that you achieve and you're done. And so they encouraged us not to get in too much into a competency mindset, and to really embrace more of a integrally based holistic perspective where it's ever evolving, and that our students are ever evolving, that we're ever evolving, that we're all continuing to learn and grow together. And I think those of us schools that embrace more holistic perspectives to educating our students are going to have an advantage in that way.
And Sarah, that brings to mind another key concept, I think, or a key idea that came forward a lot along the lines of what you're just saying. And I think that while the competencies give us a very kind of a concrete way to manage the amount of information that we do convey to students, because they had this great it was kind of like a Venn diagram where they said, we really need to look at the information that we cover from what's really meaningful to practice to what is really, good information to have. And then the third level, which is less important, is, nice to have. So that's another suggestion that I've taken to heart when I've looked at my course, using doing the revision process is to use the competencies and the subcompetencies as a framework to kind of make initial decisions about what's the, using backward design, what's the final outcome that I want from my students. But then we were also encouraged a lot to use, given what's happening in the mental health of the country, let alone mental health of students, let alone mental health of anxiety and depression, et cetera, to cultivate and to integrate for students specific self-care tools that they can use to really help to manage, their professional formation. So professional formation, professional identity is not just about the competencies, as we all know. It's also about what we bring to our clinical practice, which in our case includes our Jesuit values, and it includes using Ignatian pedagogy, where there's a lot of reflection and analysis and then action that the student is prompted to take. And so I think that is another aspect that I walked away with is, again, this is one of the strengths that we can really continue to maximize, because nursing is at risk of, without defining our disciplinary knowledge in a very clear way and articulating that to others is at risk for, kind of being consumed by other professionals. So having a professional identity as a student walking away from our program is really, really important. And we have an opportunity at USF, I think, to continue the legacy that we have of creating a situation for formation of nurses that have a very strong professional identity that's going to that will advocate for patients and for their communities, et cetera. So.
Any other comments or insights, experiences?
I just have a question. So I'm Teresa Simber. I'm adjunct faculty at Orange County. I do peds and OB-SIM. So I was a full-time faculty at a community college for 25 years, retired. So now I'm like, well, I should start attending meetings for USF since I've been here for a while. But my interest is when you were talking about the concept of alignment, across, and of course, I'm going to be proactive for including simulation in there, which you did, which covers so many of these different competencies, really. I mean, they're all included in simulation, which USF has, been engaged in for years and years, which is nice. But how is it and I'm not really that all familiar with AACN. That was a reason for me. Also, I read the email and then I saw this opportunity. So when is this all, you're in the process of kind of just updating, I guess, and just trying to, is there going to be a change in the curriculum, or you're just trying to a complete change then?
Yeah, we're trying to get that done by fall of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's okay.
Yeah, we're beginning to map. This spring semester, the faculty will all be mapping their courses, and if there's particular faculty that you work with, and Teresa, we'd love to have you get engaged and be part of that process. So
we'll see. Yeah, this is a stepping point for me. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Because a lot of things that I'm very familiar with, at a community college level, and we redesigned our curriculum a couple of times while I was faculty. And so it's just at a different level and different. Also, honestly, being at a Jesuit school, I went to them. Many of my family members graduated from Loyola Marymount. I'm very familiar with the Jesuit community. So it's interesting to me also to see that such important foundation to pull through too. So it would be interesting to do, but I'm just kind of taking baby steps joining. I didn't want to just ignore everything. I wanted to at least, because I'm sure you have no idea who I am as I popped on.
Well, we're thrilled to see you. And
thrilled to see you. Yes.
Yeah, please get involved. We'd love to have you, and we can learn and grow from you as well. So please join us.
Welcome, Teresa, and it will be helpful for you to join our retreat in January. Like all the faculty from the 3 campuses will come together, and you will see the work that has been done and the plans that we have been working towards. Do we have a date of the retreat?
January 17th. Yeah.
January 17th.
And it'll be here on campus.
Okay. At Hilltop course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check into that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll see what other commitments are going on. Retirement has made me very busy.
It's always that way.
So I have to check things. It sounds silly, but
Nope.
okay. It's interesting to me, this whole just the change in curriculum. It's a lot of work but a lot of things that seems that USF already has grounded very well. And so it's just a matter of kind of changing things. And like you said, I've heard it repeatedly from a few of you where it's nice to know that when you went to the conference, that things were already, you validated to you that already have been happening at USF for years. So that makes it a little easier.
Yeah.
And comforting, right? Comforting.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So thank you for extending the invitation and everything.
Oh, absolutely.
I was trying to find the link. Of course, I was a few minutes late trying to find the link. I'm like, I know I saw that email somewhere. Anyway.
I'm
Thank you.
trying to use the same link every time we meet. So if you ever can't find a current link, if you can find a previous link, it should be the same Zoom.
Okay, great to know. Great to know. Thanks.
Well, it's 12:46.
Well, we will be recording this and sending it out, and Nancy and I will provide a brief overview at the retreat as well. So, yeah.
Sarah, Nancy, have you investigated giving CEUs for these sessions? I know we did the CEUs were given a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we started looking at the AACN essentials. And the School of Nursing provided those.
Here at USF?
USF. Yep. Check with Alexa. What's her name? Oh gosh, she's sitting right in front of me. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember her name. Our associate dean, who retired, Susan Preon, who's no longer here, but she did the sessions. And then Nancy, you and Elena did one of the guest sessions.
Oh, yeah,
Do you
I didn't
remember
realize.
on backward design? Anyway,
I didn't realize they were
CEUs.
for it. Yeah, we can check into that. We'll check into that.
Yeah, it was my understanding we'd have to fill out forms for every time we meet, and it's a lot of extra work. So I don't know.
I've given CEUs before. If you have a system in place, you have a provider number, you just need objectives. You could have one objective for each session. They're only an hour long. And everyone has to fill out something that they went there and that it was valuable to them. It's like 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, I know how to do
So
it.
it is extra paperwork, but
Yeah.
you know what? I think if we want to get people on board with this is another way to attract them.
Okay, thanks, Francie.
Okay.
We'll check into it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Well, we will see you all in 10 minutes in Phase-On HP. May you refresh yourselves and move a little bit and have a good holiday. And we'll see you on January 17th on the
Yeah,
Hilltop.
thanks so much for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.